Hello, I'm Colin Riddington, and today in this final session for Access DevCon 2026, I'm going to show you how you can add style to Windows forms and message boxes in Access. My website is isleofdogs.co.uk, and in the final slide I will give you links to specific articles and example apps where you can download the items I'm going to demonstrate today. First thing I'm going to do is talk about pop-up forms, and these are top-level windows. They are independent of the Access user interface, and this means that you've got certain flexibility to customize them in ways that are not possible with standard forms. There are some things you can do with no code whatsoever in both Windows 10 and 11, and there's other things that you can do with an API that only work in Windows 11. Let's start with the no code things. Using Windows settings, we are able to change the color of the title bar and also of the borders in pop-up forms, only in pop-up forms. So we go to personalization, colors. I'm sure you'll have looked at this. You can then choose your accent color, which can be used for the taskbar and various other things on the screen. At the moment I've got this blue color here, but an option you may never have done is to show the accent color on title bars and window borders. So when I click on that now, and if we click on the Access app here, and when I go to my no code for here, we've got the color that I set in Windows settings for that form. Just shrink that a little bit and move this over, and then bring up the settings again and go to a different color. Let's choose one of the ones at the top here, green. Yep, that's now done. And as soon as I make this active, then we've got that color. If we change to the dark red color there, both the border and the title bar change accordingly, and the text color for the caption is automatically updated to match whatever you've done. And you can choose from any of these or any custom color, and if you've got Windows dark themes, you've got an extra possibility as well, but I'm using Windows light theme and I won't change that now. I'm going to turn this off again. Before I do that, the problem with this is that whatever color you choose there will apply to all of your windows, all of your top level windows, not just in Access pop-up forms, but everywhere throughout Windows. So Edge, for example, is now that red color. And if we change this back to the green, it automatically updates as it does again there. So unfortunately, this is customization by uniformity. I'm going to turn this thing off again. And when I've turned it off, now clicking on my form here, it doesn't show any of those changes that we had before. Let's just minimize Edge. Might need it later. And I'm going to just drag this out of the way because I'm not going to use this for a while. Now, there's an extra thing though we can do. And if we just increase the size of this, I'm having trouble with my mouse, it seems. Okay, so now I'm going to go to a test form. Close that one. Now the test form with Windows 11 using an API, which is one that you've probably never used within Access, and that is you can change each of these things independently. And I can have this red color that I had there before. Let's change that to cyan, just for it's different. I've chosen the standard VBA colors plus gray, but you can put in anything you like there. Text color there, I'll leave it as white. Border color, I'll make it blue. I'm in Windows 11, so the standard default for forms is a rounded border. I'll make it square just to be cussed, and the backdrop style I'll come back to later. So click on that, and I've now got those colors. You may not like them, that's fine. Let's change that one to green. And you get the idea of this. Now, for each of these, then I've got all of those, the 8 standard VBA colors, and I've arbitrarily added a gray color there. We can make it so it's actually invisible if there's any use in that. Best to have a decent level of contrast there. It'll only update after I click the apply button there. I can have a yellow border. I can go back to rounded or small rounded and so on. A couple of extra things I can do. I can have no color at all for the border. which effectively is a borderless form. Now, borderless forms, of course, are perfectly possible from the property sheet as one of the 4 different standard possibilities. But the extra functionality you've got here is you've got a title bar. And when you have a borderless form from the property sheet, you lose the title bar, which means you lose the ability to easily drag the form from one place to another. It can be done with a different API. Article on my website about that, but this gives you an easy way of doing that. And you can change the amount of rounding as well. So you can't see that very clearly, of course, because I've actually got the border set as no color. Now, the last thing here, backdrop style. Each of the things I've shown above here have been available through this API since the beginning of Windows 11. But the backdrop style was only added a few months ago. And the backdrop style possibilities are none, which I've got now, which means that the title bar actually takes priority. You can have auto, main window, transient window, tab. So the only one I'm going to concentrate on is transient. I don't really find main window and tab window do anything useful. Now when I click on that, I've got code that automatically blanks out. So basically you're not having 2 sets of code trying to compete with each other. Now, you may say, well, that's not very exciting when you've actually clicked on that, and it isn't at the moment. But if I move that over there, you can see it's translucent and it's taking on the color of whatever the background is. Let me just now shrink my access form a bit again and drag the settings form down again, because it's got lots of nice pretty colors, and let's move over those. And you can now see it's taking on the colors that it's moving over, and you can get some quite nice pretty effects like the old arrow which got dumped many years ago. Okay, and if you put it over your desktop, then when you've got a brightly colored desktop, it'll take that on. So it's just purely pretty rather than having any functionality at all, but you might like the look of that. So got one more possibility, and this is this example form. And the example form, I've got 3 possible states set in at form load or on this button click. On form load, it gives you the access red color here. I can have independently, no matter what mode I've got in Office, use the black theme just for this form, dark mode. Turn it off again, I'm using white mode there. So we've got all those 3 possibilities. Now, each of these different things, don't need this now again, each of these 3 different things are done with one simple API. The API is called DWM. The API is called DWM Set Windows Attribute. As I say, it's been around for many years, actually since Windows 2000. Many features were added at the time of Aero, and many of them have been taken away since. It had absolutely no value whatsoever within VBA for access until Windows 11, and as I say, with the exception of the backdrop style, which was added later on in Windows 11, all of these have been available since the first version of Windows 11, but only in Windows 11. We need to identify the form by its handle, we set the attributes, and the values that we use apply to the form that you're actually setting it to. So we've got a series of constants. One's for the backdrop style, 5 of those, tells you what each of those there are like. Corner preferences, caption color, text color, and so on. You can have any value you like for the colors, obviously. Immersive dark mode, to have a temporary dark mode just for that particular form if you wish to, or to turn it off just for that form if you wish to. Corner style as well, and then a special value for suppressing the border color, making it a borderless form there. So we then apply whichever constant we want. If we want to set the caption text, then we use this API, identify the form, put in the text color there, the color of the text, and then 4 is the refresh value for this screen here. And we always use 4 for that last one there. Set Windows attribute for the caption color, border color, system backdrop style, etc. And set form dark mode there, we've got this extra little bit of code. When I open my example form load is set to be title bar red and the caption text white, and the border color to be mid blue and the corner style to be rounded and so on. I've turned off the backdrop style. Remember, you can't have that with the title bar. When I click the button, we can then turn on the dark mode, in which case it changes the color of the title bar using color none here, and then form dark mode is set, command dark mode, the text caption and so on, and we change the other ones in the same way. One API, as I said, obscure for Access VBA developers, but it has a series of features, and maybe they will add extra functionality in the future. I don't know why they chose to add the backdrop style recently, but they did, and so we can make use of it. Let's now go on to pop-up form positioning. Another issue with pop-up forms is because they are independently accessed user interface, they will always open on the monitor where they were last saved. For most purposes, that's fine. For developers, we often use 2 or more monitors, and if you choose to save your pop-up form on the secondary monitor, that can cause a problem for the end users with the form being off-screen. If they've only got a single monitor and you've saved it on the secondary monitor, they won't see the form at all. So the solution is simple, and that is to specify where your pop-up form is going to open, either relative to the primary monitor or relative to the Access application window, whichever suits you better. Let me show you what I mean. So with this then, we've got a form here, which I'll just slightly enlarge this using the new form zoom feature. You can see it more clearly. And the first form, form 0, has got no specifications about where it'll open. And so when I clicked on that, it's actually opened on my secondary monitor, so you can't see it. Because I have got a secondary monitor, I can bring this back. If I just close that and just show you what I mean, if we go into the code here, there is no code on form 0 to say where it should be when it first opens. But for form 1, when it loads, it's actually got code here, position pop-up for the current form, to offset its position on the primary monitor 200 pixels, not TWIPs, pixels in from the left, and 150 pixels downwards. So let me show you what that looks like in practice. Here's the form 1. Opened there. I can drag it across, I can save that, I can close that, and it still opens in exactly the same place next time. Form 2 is designed to open in the center of the primary monitor. As you can see, if I drag the Access window over to the other screen here and click on Form 2 again, it still opens on this monitor. Form 3 is designed to always open over the Access application window. So if I drag that back again, and Form 3 is designed to open near the top left again, 200 pixels in from the left, 150 downwards. So if we do this to here now, okay, it opens over there, not relative to the monitor, but relative to the Access application window. If I close that and just shrink the Access window and bring it over here, then that form, well, that was form 3, wasn't it? Now opens over here. So it's always relative to the Access application window. Form 4 is in the center of the UI window, and because the UI window is there, it's opening over that. If I just close that and just maximize this and open Form 4 now, it opens in the center screen there. We can choose anywhere we like with this. If you prefer, you can have the forms opening the top right, bottom left, anywhere you like. But the principle is the same for each of these. Again, very little code is required to actually implement that. So for Form 1, it opens offset on the primary monitor by that amount. For Form 2, it opens centered on the primary monitor. For Form 3, offset, that's it, offset compared to the Access window with 200 and 150, choose your values, and for Form 4, centered on the Access window. But the actual code then, for this, we've got 3 APIs. The first one gets the size of the window. The second one determines the primary monitor. That's the Access window, by the way. That determines the primary monitor, so we can do things relative to that. And then the third one, I'm using an API called Move Window to move the form to the position specified. Now, that uses pixels, not TWIPs. I could use do command move size, the standard thing for moving forms around. Problem with that is if you've got 2 monitors side by side and your primary monitor on the left, then the secondary monitor, the center of it, may well exceed the limit, the integer limit in TWIPs, and therefore your code will fail. To avoid that problem, if I use move window rather than do command move size, that's in pixels, you will never exceed the limit. It's going to work whatever. So we need to get the handle for the form, we specify the positions there, we get the width and the height of the form, and we tell it to repaint, in other words, to go where we want it to. So we've got the pop-up position mode, the 4 I've chosen here. You could add other ones, top right access, here's number 5 for example if you wanted to, but that's the 4 I've done here. So here's my code. We need to first of all get the form, we then set the mode, and if we are doing it offset by a certain amount, the values in pixels there. We get the handle for the form, we get the handle for the access application, we get the primary monitor, and we then get the size of the primary monitor, we get the access window, we get the size of the access window, form width, form height, top to bottom, left and right, and so on. So then we set the position there, case offset primary, we get the left position of the desktop, top position of the desktop, we add the number of specified pixels to each of those to say where the top left of the window will be, of the form will be. Center of the primary monitor, same sort of idea, but we get the left of the desktop, we get the right position of the desktop, so we then add half the distance between the left and right side, half the width of the screen. We take off half the width of the form and by dividing by 2 there, and that gives us where that will be centered. Same with the top. For offset access, exactly the same idea, but using the left and the top positions of the access window, and for the center of the access window, exactly the same as the desktop one there, but using the center. And once we've done that, we then move the window, the form in other words, to those positions there, and we set that value true to actually make sure it refreshes, otherwise it won't actually change its position to what we've set. So that's my code to open a pop-up form in a guarantee position, so you avoid any problems for your end users. Let's move on again. Theme-aware forms. Themes have been available since Access 2010, and Office theme, or since Office 2010, and there were 3 of them originally, blue, silver, and another one. And those then could be set both from Access options or using VBA at the time. These days you can now detect the values using VBA, but you can no longer set the theme using VBA. The theme is actually stored, I believe, in the cloud these days. It's still stored in the registry for backwards compatibility, but that value is effectively read-only. If you edit the value in the registry, it has no effect whatsoever. So we can use the registry to read the value, but we have to alter the theme if we want to in the standard way. And we then, having read the color there, the theme that we were using, we can then set a series of different form components to actually be values that we choose to be, and we can allow for exceptions. Let me show you what I mean. Now, the theme values are stored in the registry at HKey current user software Microsoft Office 16.0 common UI theme. Enlarge that just slightly so you can read it more carefully. Values in English UK are dark grey, black, white and colourful, and also to use system settings. The numbers will apply whatever your language is, but obviously the names will change there. I've stored those values in a table called UI TBL UI theme. If you've got Spanish, French, German or whatever language, just change the names there to the ones used by Access by default. And as I said already, although we can get that value from the registry, we can't change that by editing the registry or by using VBA there. And I can change the Office UI theme in Access options or from the accounts page. I'll just shrink this back down again and go back down to 100 so it fits in 2 forms side by side. And if we open a new form, similar idea to before, we're using colourful theme as you can see here, and if we just move that over a little bit then okay, and so you can see that for the colourful theme I've chosen to make what was the Access dark red, now a slightly different colour, for the header and the footer, and also for the button colors when they're not actually hovered over or clicked. And on the controls then I've done the same thing for buttons there, the tab color, the various different parts of the combo boxes and so on work in a different way. Black and white for the selected one there, and also for the list box. Now, with this then, if we change the theme in Office, I'm going to do it from the account page rather than access options, which is slightly quicker to get to. I'll go to dark grey. And now we've gone to that. I've deliberately not used the timer event to actually keep track of where the theme changes. All I need to do is to change that. You wouldn't normally be changing the colour on the fly like I'm doing here. But you saw, as soon as I changed to dark grey, it's now using the dark Office Fluent UI dark grey colour. It's using the same colour for the detail section as for the navigation pane and other parts of the user interface, and for the text is now white rather than black. Similarly, if I click on this button here, it's also updated in exactly the same way as before. For the subform here, alternate row colors, I've chosen colors that are legible or fairly legible. That may be a little bit limited in terms of contrast. Each of these you're able to alter yourself. I've used Fluent UI colors, but I haven't stuck rigidly to them throughout here. When, for example, the toggle button is turned on, I've chosen to use that blue color. Now, you may not want your theme, your forms to be quite like this. Let's change to a commoner one here, black theme, probably the most common one these days apart from colourful. And when I refresh the form, we've then got jet black here, a darker grey there, still white for the text there, same with this one. Oh, and the contrast shows up better now on there than it does on the grey, which is a bit washed out there. I've also got a version of the second form without the header and the footer, and you can see here that the thing still works perfectly well. I've moved the footer text there into the details section. I've got one more possible theme, and that is white, which is a very totally washed out appearance. I don't like it. I don't think many people use it. Refresh form, very bland. Refresh form, bit more colour in there for the contrast in the list box and the combo there. But that's your 4 possibilities. The last one, use system settings. If I go on to that, it won't surprise you that I said that I don't particularly like the black theme. I use colourful normally, and that therefore I also use the Windows Light theme. And when I change this then in use system settings, if it's the Windows Light theme in use, it will go to colourful, and if it's the Windows Dark theme, that would have gone to the black there. So that's my possibilities. So how have I done this? One module again. First thing it does is it reads that registry key to see what the registry key value is, 3, 4, 5, 6 or 7. It also allows you to use the value 0, historical reasons there. If it is 0, it reads that as though it was 7, colourful, which is the default colour there. 3, 4, 5, 7, then it takes the value, and I've given you the name of that from that table by doing a DLOOKUP, which I've then put on the form. If the value is 6, use system settings. It uses this resolve system theme, and resolve system theme will then default to be black if it's Windows Dark mode, 0, and white if it's Windows Light mode, which is 1. Then, having opened my form, let's just show you the code here. When the form loads, it does update form colors. Update form colors then is this. It sets the text for the Office theme, optional. You apply the theme to the form, the current form, and then you've got various other items, exceptions, and so on here. So I've got exceptions for the colourful theme, but let's have a look at apply theme to form. So apply theme to form will then set the details set back color to be the theme back color, the form header to be the Office accent color, and so on. It might be helpful if I showed you those first. So if we start off here then, this was Access Red until a few months ago. It's now slightly different. So the Office accent color then is used if it's colorful theme. If it's white theme, we use pure white for the accent color. If it's black theme, it's pure black, and if it's dark grey theme, we use a surprise, a dark grey. These are the approved Fluent UI colours. The theme back colour That's for the background color for the detail section and so on. I've got 4 different values here. They're all shades of grey depending on which of the themes you're using. So if it's a white theme, okay, we use an off-white color. Same for the colorful theme, same off-white color. If it's a black theme, we use a dark grey for the detail section, and if it's dark grey theme, use a lighter grey, so for contrast there. I changed that value. You can see you can choose whatever values you like. I've chosen to make them this, but they fit in with other parts of the Access user interface. Secondary back color for things like text boxes and so on, and again 4 different shades of grey. The values I've used here, by the way, are exactly the same as the values on the other one there, but I've allowed them as separate different functions, so you can actually change those independently if you choose to do so, because you may wish to use this in a different way in your own apps. Theme text color is either black or white. Black for light coloured themes, black and white for dark coloured themes. Secondary text colour, this is for things like buttons and so on, and again 4 different shades of grey, from the lightest on a black colour, second lightest, and then darkest on the lighter coloured themes, again to make sure contrast is there. Theme border colours, 4 different shades of grey, except we're using the same 2 for white colourful. And this one is totally unofficial. Although the others have some bearing on the Office UI, Fluent Office UI themes, right, this one is totally mine, and you can choose to change this completely. So I've got the alternate row colour for dark grey is this mid-grey colour here. For black, it's a slightly lighter mid-grey colour. For white, it's a very pale grey, and for colourful I've used a pinkish colour. And so then we apply the theme to the form. We get the detail back colour from one of those. We get the header and footer back colour. You don't have to have the same ones for the header and footer, so I've done it separately. You don't have to do that. Then colours for each of the different controls that I've used there. You may, as I say, not want to follow this colour scheme. The idea is that for your apps, you might want to have a corporate branding colours for the header and the footer, but have other things change according to theme. You can use the idea of reading the registry and then setting the different components so it works for your end users no matter what theme they're doing. You could of course do much of this with the built-in Office theme Access feature, but this gives you more power, more independence, more flexibility. I think it gives you more scope. Message boxes. Now, the last thing I'm going to do will take me a little bit longer. For 30 plus years, the VBA message box has been characterized as being bland, effective but bland, but only effective in the sense it does its job, but easily clicked on and ignored by end users. Interestingly, there's always been a second style of Access message box. The built-in ones use the Access Expression service, which for many years had a bold first line for Access messages. A couple of years ago, though, they wanted to update that, and they wanted to actually allow it to change with themes, which it didn't do before, and they brought out a new Fluent UI message box across the whole of Office, where the color, it has a color which depends on the Access Red or XL Green and so on. Currently it's in Access 365 current channel or faster, but it will gradually roll out to all of the slower channels as well. I've got 2 functions here, MessageBox T and MessageBox TC, both of which will create any of those styles of message box. And they will also, unlike the standard VBA message box, support Unicode text, not previously possible. They will support online and local help files, which always was possible. They also support ease of access features, again always possible, such as larger text size and high contrast themes. But the new thing is that it will adapt to Office theme colors, as I'll show you, but that only applies to the new Fluent SAR messages. So I've got 2 different functions here. MessageBox T is exactly the same arguments as the standard VBA message box. Only the prompt, the message text if you like, is compulsory. All the others are optional, and default values are used for the buttons, the title, help file, context. I'll explain them later. The added argument is the optional timeout value, so it either stays up forever or turns off after a few seconds automatically. And then I've got a countdown version of that message box TC, which adds yet one more argument, countdown, which is a Boolean value, yes or no. And again, all of these optional arguments have default values, so you don't have to enter them. You can just use the default. In both cases, it's been designed so that the functions have the same arguments as the standard message box in the same order, plus one, or in this case 2 additional arguments. By renaming these functions as message box, or this one as message box, then Access will use the custom function rather than the built-in VBA message box, and no code will be broken. Let me show you this in practice, starting off with this message box T function. Now, the message box T function is designed to create any of those styles of message box, the Fluent UI one, the old style, the new style, and it supports each of these things. And I'll show you them several examples here. We've got these different arguments to match in with the current message box. All the code is in one module again. Let's show you some examples. This form is just a little bit too big on my laptop for the screen here. I'm just going to shrink that slightly so you can actually see nearly all of it. I know that's a bit small there, okay, and I'm just going to temporarily also show you another of the newly added features, something I asked for, which was to allow full screen mode to be available in Access as well. So here is my form. Let me show you what the Fluent UI message looks like for those of you that actually don't have a current version, sorry, a new faster version of Access 365. So this is going to mimic the message you get when you click on an object to delete it. So this is being done by my message box T function. I will get exactly the same thing if I click on that. As you can see, they were identical. Now, I don't actually want to delete it there. So we've got our message prompt with splitting the blocks into 3, okay, with the @ symbol there. We've got no title, it's been left blank, and it will use the application title as a default there. We've got an icon, we've got a default button there. Let me just bring that up again. Oops. Okay, so showing this again, then our title is the title of the app because we haven't specified one. Here's our first block of text before the ampersand symbol. Then there's a blank line. Then the second block, in this case there isn't a third block, appears to the right of the message box icon. We've got the default button number 1. That also is the same red color with white text, and the other button or buttons are light pale color there in this theme anyway, with dark text there. We've got a help file, and that will take us, if we click on that, that takes us to this Microsoft help file. I've got no timeout on this one. I'm not going to add a timeout to that one because I've got other ones there. All right, so there's my title. I've got my 3 blocks there separated by ampersand symbols. I have got a timeout on this one, and it disappeared after 6 seconds without me doing anything at all. And I have got a help file that takes me to the BBC website. I'm not going to bother to do that then. All right, timeout of 6,000 milliseconds there. So if I click on here and do Shift and F2, so you can see all of the message box code there. So we're using the message box T function all the way through here. We've got our prompt in 3 blocks. We've got our buttons. We've got our title. We've got our help file, we've got our context value, I'll come back to that later, and we've got our timeout value there. Another one with a timeout, I've got 5 seconds to decide before this closes. It's not counting down, but it is doing that invisibly, and without me doing anything, it's disappeared after 5 seconds. Let's give you one with a long title. That's the maximum number of characters allowed. A ridiculous title, you wouldn't use that normally, but 132 characters, and it's going to disappear after 15 seconds, which is roughly what I need to talk about that particular message box. Perfect. Now, I can also have a long message. I can have up to 3,000, well, to be precise, 2,999 characters for that. The trouble with that, I had a shorter timeout there, is the buttons can be off the bottom of the screen depending on your monitor size, which without a timeout could be a bit of a problem. So we can have a long message, we can have a long title. We can also have Unicode. So we've got a Unicode message again with the timeout, this time of 5 seconds, and you saw English text with some Unicode characters. Let's just do this one again. We'll change the button, the default button now to number 3, which is ignore. We'll change that to critical, and we'll just now show the message. So default button there, critical button, and so on. I'm not going to save that one. Arabic text, so it's asking me, no, I don't want to save it. Arabic text. Okay, so some script there and some Unicode symbols, game Greek. So we can have any language we like and a mixture of Unicode symbols in the title and the prompt if we wish to do so. Now, all of those values then are new style Fluent UI messages, but we can also create the old style ones. And the old style one with the bold first block of text, the second one and the third one then separated but not bold there. I've done that by setting the context value to less than 0. Now, the Access Expression Service only has 2 possibilities that it uses. 0 will give you the help button, in this case a question mark for the new style messages if you've set a URL, and if you have greater than 0, but even without a URL, you'll still get the help button there, which can be a bit confusing. It doesn't specify anything for less than 0, so I'm making use of that. And by missing out the help file and the effectively the context argument, then it will create, interestingly, the old style messages, the same as it always used to. I haven't done that, it's just built in. That's a legacy. I don't know why they chose to leave that, but they did. So if we prefer the bold style messages like this, we can still have them. And that is closing after 5 seconds. But again, still no countdown. Long message, same as before. There is a timeout on that one as well. And we can also have a long title, wish to do so. And we can also have a standard message without timeout, or with a timeout. So if you want, you can use this to replicate the VBA message box. Not very exciting, we can do that. Now, if we just come out of the full screen mode a second, and I'm going to change it back to show tabs. I've got less on the screen there. If I change the Office theme, black, okay, and now go back to here, the old style messages look the same as ever. So not actually in any way changed by the theme, either of those. But the Fluent UI ones are updated in line with the Office theme. So if I had dark grey theme, it would change to that, and so on. Another message there. One more thing, if we come back to the settings screen here, and we go to accessibility or ease of access, one thing we can do is we can increase the text size. Apply, takes a few seconds, and now when we click on the message here, you can see it's automatically expanded to match that. Do another one here, the standard messages, they always did this, they always worked with the ease of access settings there, but it's only the themes that are new there. So we can increase the text size if we want to. Let's change that back and remember to set apply again. So back to the normal one. Another thing that we can do though is we can go to, and I always forget where this is, display, contrast themes. Now at the moment I've got no theme being used here. I'm going to go to night sky, which is this one here. I'm going to apply it. Can't do anything about the extra time. Now, you may not like this, but if you've got poor vision, you might find this sort of thing far better here. So we've now got a style of message that I don't particularly like. It's also turned Windows sound on, which is a bit irritating. I tend to leave that off for here. So with each of these, it takes the old style message as well, and even the standard message there. So the ease of access settings work in each of those. Let me go back into themes. I'm going to turn that off and apply that, and again I've got to wait, and it'll probably beep at me again. Oh, it didn't that time. And there's one more possibility which I always forget where it actually is, and that's grayscale. Now, well, the ones we've got, I showed you there, we've made it more obvious to those people who've got vision issues there, but grayscale allows you to actually have a purely monochrome message, which you might actually want to have. So grayscale, click that. We are on that. Let's turn it on though. Right, we're on grayscale now. So we now click our message, and you can see it's purely monochrome message. Here's another one. Standard message doesn't change. Old style doesn't change. Those were monochrome anyway, but the newer one will change with that. Let's get rid of that again. If you need to use them, they are a lifesaver. If you don't need to use them, then realistically that's not something you actually will want to have left on. You find it more of a nuisance than a benefit. Hopefully we're back to where we were before. Black theme and Windows sound is on. I'm going to turn the sound off from here. This is pretty much it. Here's my function now. Remember, most of this is the Access Expression Service. I've added 4 APIs to allow me to do the timeout feature. First thing we need to do is to identify the handle for the top level window. And because we're using Unicode for both the title and the prompt, if we want to, we have to be able to use a wide version of the Find Window API. This will support Unicode. Find Window A wouldn't do, and it would fail if you put any Unicode characters in the title. Post as message W, exactly the same thing here. We then, having identified the window, we then place that message in the message queue with the thread that specified it and return it without waiting for it to process. We then have code to set the timer with the specified timeout value if it's not 0, and we destroy that timer when the message is either closed by the user or it times out automatically. And we've got code here that actually deals with that. So here's my function. Message box T, 1 compulsory argument, rest are optional with default values. Default for the buttons is the OK button only. Default for the title is nothing. Default for the help file is nothing. Context is 0, and for the timeout value is 0, which means no timeout. Set some various values at the beginning there. If the title hasn't been specified, then it tells it to use the application title if it exists. And that's a function here, helper function, that looks to see if there's a database properties called app title, which for this one was message box timeout. If there is, it uses that. If there isn't, it puts Microsoft Access in instead. Same as any normal message box will do. Once we've got that, then we try and simplify things. Those of you who've ever worked with the eval function know that you can end up with multiple double quotes all over the place. It's easy to make mistakes if you're not using it all the time. So to simplify things, then I've got escape values that handles that for you for the prompt, the title, and the help file if you're using one. So we prepare the SAPE. We set the message box title according to whether it's the app title or one that you've specified. If there's a timeout, it gets the handle for the message. It then sets the timer according to that, and then it sets this value to be referred to when it's time to close it all. You then build the eval string that will then run your message box and make it look like the style you've chosen. If the context value is 0 or higher, it uses all of the arguments. If you set the context to less than 0, it ignores the help file, it ignores the context argument in the normal sense of the word, and it creates the old style message. I've not done anything. It's just Access left that code in as it was, which is for me is absolutely fine. So we then use the evaluation of this. If we've got a timer, then when it gets to the necessary time, we kill this so it doesn't persist in the future for that particular message box handle. And then if the user's actually clicked a button, then it uses that. If not, it returns the default button according to whichever you set as the default on your message there. And when it closes, then it uses this function, this sub here, close message box timer, finds the window, and then sets both of these here to be using the null string and the title there, and that will allow you to, as simply as possible, get the handle for the message and close the message when the time comes. And finally, sorry, I mentioned this already, the default button result then will depend on which of the button choices you've got and which one of the buttons you set to be the default. And then it will return that if the message closes automatically on a timeout. This does almost everything. The exceptions that it doesn't do are that it doesn't show a countdown, and it also doesn't allow you to have rich text, and that is because access messages from the expression service here, access messages do not allow for rich text, so therefore nor does my function. I wish it did, but that's not the case. Let's close this one, and we've just got one final stage to do, and that's the countdown version of that. Now this is a lot more complicated. I have no intention of going through all of the code of this. Exactly the same form as before, but we've got one extra item, which is the countdown thing, which is true or false. So if we turn that off for a second and run that particular message, do I want to save the change to the current message? Well, I better say yes. That is a built-in message out. Let's run it again. Right, so we've got this. It is counting down. After 5 seconds it's going to close, but you're not getting indication of that. So let's now turn on the countdown feature. Oops, didn't save it, did I? And now you can see up at the top here, it's counting down both in text and with a mini progress bar what that value is. Let's change this back to a colourful theme, and you'll see that the countdown changes colour and the progress bar works as well. So that is timing out. One of these had a really long timeout. I think it was this one. And you can see that more clearly. So all I have to do is turn off that countdown and it disappears. Now this works for any of these messages. For the new style messages, it will always appear in the space where there isn't a title because the header is moved down there. For the old style messages, you have got a title. I could have put the progress bar over there. I decided not to do so because if you got a longer title then, right, or that was a shortish title, but if you got a long title, you'd still overlap it. So I chose to put it underneath here, but you can choose to put it where you like, top right if you like instead there. And the standard message, exactly the same thing. I'm not going to go through the code for this. I'll say, though, it's all in one module, again called module time message box. There we go, back to that. Sorry, I didn't mean to close it. And I just want to compare the complication of doing this. The text there, the progress bar and the text there is overlay text. It's actually not part of the window. It's actually separate. I didn't show you this before, so I better do so now. And if we go to this one that's got a long timeout, sorry, wrong one that has got a long timeout value of 15 seconds now. If I move it around, you see it gets left behind and it'll catch up every second. It's a separate message. It's a kludge basically, but it does work. There's only 3 ways you could do this. You could either have the standard one that I did before, but interrupt it every second and redraw it. Trouble with that is it's irritating for the end user because the message will be flashing on and off, and also it makes it almost impossible to use because you haven't got time to click the buttons, or you create your own message form. The third method then, the overlay that I'm using here, this one then, seems to lost the VBA, just compare the amount of code that this requires. So I've got my Office themes here from the previous one. Then go to the time message box. Remember, I had 4 APIs before. I've still got them, but all the ones from here onwards are extras just to create the countdown. All of that lot is just to create the countdown text there. You decide whether it's worth it there. Extra argument here, so you set your colors for the countdown depending on the Windows theme used, the Office theme used. You set the position for the countdown window when it first opens. There you can choose to change those values according to what you like. I've got different positions for whether it's an old style or a new style window there. You set your transparency up to 255 maximum, totally transparent, and then you then just run through the similar code to before, but with the extra things to display the countdown value. It gets very complicated, lots of extra code required. For you as an end user, you just do the argument, it will work. You don't need to do anything at all. But as I say, you cannot just build it in. That's the only way you can actually do this, is to use this particular method. We'll come out of this and close this window here. These are the articles for each of the different examples I've shown you here. For the pop-up forms, then, for the pop personalization and for the position there, for the theme aware forms we've got here, and I've got a whole series of messages about fluent UI message boxes with or without timeout, with or without countdown. All of that are available. Hopefully that was useful to you. And any questions?
I would suggest we move the questions. There were a couple of questions, but I think none are critical to understanding your presentation. So I think we move them to the feedback hour and deal with them in a more relaxed setting there.
That's absolutely fine by me.
Thank you very much for the very interesting presentation, Colin.